Good morning, Jack. Good morning, everybody. It's the 24th of November, and welcome to another episode of the Green Focus podcast, hosted by me, Yaron. I'm CEO of Focus IP. It's an IP management consultancy based in Israel. And the aim of this podcast is to discover and showcase transformative Israeli green tech and help advance this ecosystem to make a serious green impact, together with impactors and leaders in the space. And so today's guest is Jack Levy. Hi, Jack.
How are
Jack
you,
is
Yaron?
a corporate lawyer, an experienced corporate lawyer, and he's founding partner of More VC. All right, a little bit, Jack, a little bit of introduction. More VC invests in pre-seed, seed, and early stage Israeli technology startups, and he's a board member on multiple companies, extensive experience in building high-growth companies and leading management teams through successful capital raising. That's part of your CV, Jack. And I know you well for many, many years as well, as a friend in the community. Um, and I've noticed that you have focused over the years on many spaces in terms of sustainability related. More recently, I would say on agri-tech, food tech, mobility, etc. Obviously, I look forward to hearing more from you about these things. But I want to explore today your kind of interfacing with the innovators of sustainable technology. Okay, you've got us from your side, from an investor point of view. What's your narrative? How do you as a person, and how do you as more VC, as an entity, work to maximize the impact of these technologies on our planet? And so let's start off with that. Jack, who are you and what is your vision?
Well, I mean, who am I? That makes me think about going, way back. I'm an American. I'm an Israeli, right? I came here when I was 33. I'm now 52. I've got three kids, 24, 22, 18 and a half. I've got one, fighters after the army. So I think that's when you realize you're really Israeli. Um, and I'm lucky in terms of my connection to green tech and clean tech or climate tech or planet tech. And trust me, I've been through all the names, right? Because our firm initially, as you know, Yaron, was called Israel Cleantech Ventures, and as we sort of
Yes.
broadened our scope a little bit, we we rebranded under More VC, but we're still very active. And I think you noted very well that we've more been focused on the food and the ag and the mobility, although most recently, and we'll talk about this, we also did our first carbon removal technology investment as well in a company called Carbon Blue. So I got into this whole field, as I think many people do, through a relationship. And that is my college roommate, who's a fellow named Sanjay Wagle, one of my best friends, lives out in San Francisco. Interesting guy. He was always an environmentally conscious, and he was one of the first clean tech investors. He was at one of the firms that was one of the first clean tech investors on the West Coast, a fund called Expansion Capital. This is like in 2003, 2004, after he went to Haas Business School, where there his sort of focus was on a wave power technology company. So he was really early into this from an investor perspective. He subsequently went into the Obama administration at the Department of Energy when they launched ARPA-E, which is like the DARPA program for energy. And they're sort of, supporting moonshot opportunities and next generation research opportunities really out of universities for that. And by the way, at the same time, I was here in Israel and he was saying, look, we're seeing interesting things in Israel applying for ARPA-E grants, or we're seeing interesting things in Israel trying to raise money on the West Coast. And there's no Israeli company that's investor that's focused on this. And I said, that sounds interesting. As an investor, you're looking to focus earlier than everybody else. That's critical, right? You want to get into the trend, the opportunity, the company, whatever it is, before everybody else has seen its potential. And then you want them to catch up. And that's what effectively drives the price of the stock up and drives your return. And I said, okay, if nobody's looking at it, let's take a look at it. And at that time, my partner, Mayor, and I, we were potentially going to join a different fund. And we literally just started driving around the country in his Mitsubishi. It was like an old station wagon to find these companies in Israel that were focused on this, because they were being ignored. They certainly, I don't know if they were being ignored, but they certainly weren't being focused on by the then $2.5 billion or so of venture capital. This is like 2006, that was focused here. And which was all at the time looking at, software and internet and communications and some hardware as well, but not energy, water, agriculture. At the same time, however, in Israel, we had global leaders in some of those areas. Okay, so we had, Ormat, which is a global leader in the geothermal space. We had Nitafim and Metzoplast and others in the agricultural space, certainly global leaders. So there was this management team capability on older, not venture-backed, but older, slower growth, kibbutz-backed, industrial-backed, whatever. Israel Chemicals, a massive player in the agricultural space, Machtishi Magan, which became Adama. So we saw the potential that these worlds would start to collide, and the tech world also, and everything that it was doing, would start to have applications in these other worlds. Applications meaning sensors and measurement and data that they were doing in other areas would become even more relevant as sustainability became more and more important. So that was the opportunity that we saw. And that's how we started out. So I give a lot of credit. I call Sanjay the godfather of Cleantech, and we were the first. And there was another fund that started shortly thereafter us, and they remain good friends to this day, called Terra Ventures. And of course, subsequent to that, lots of other investors, got involved. And it went, we went through some ups, we went through some downs, and we're most definitely on a very nice uptick at this point in time in terms of both the pace of investing and what I would say is particularly the quality of the entrepreneurs. You ask, what do we look for? How do we focus, right? It's like we are early stage investors. We are pre-seed and seed investors. We are investing in people. And I can tell you that the quality, the intellectual firepower, the management experience, the depth of the people that are now trying to start companies in this area is markedly better than it was when we first started out 10 to 15 years ago. So that's exciting.
Jack, so let me just focus on one or 2 points that you raised there. One of them, and that was one of my other questions, what are you looking at when you invest in a startup? And the reason I'm skipping to that question is what you mentioned now. You said the firepower of the people. Have you noticed that people are there's strong people in this sector because there's more experience now in Israel with that, and because there's more energy going there now? Or is it because people are also jumping fields? They experienced entrepreneurs from other fields who've now entered this green tech space because it's hot and cool and wanted, or anything else like that?
Yeah, I think it's both. And I think it's, in particular, I'll say, as you know, and as you may have spoken to your, viewers in the past, right? A lot of the tech talent in this country does stem out from certain military intelligence units where they really have these amazing, intense experiences. And a lot of these people serve well beyond 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, in some of these areas, the 8200s, the A1s, and other areas. And so lots of those people who really are kind of the best and the brightest, like the Talpiot program, okay, which is a very well-known program here in Israel that selects 50 students a year to go start studying math and physics and then computer science sometimes, and then really gives them almost like a pick of the litter of what they're going to do in their military service. There's now a whole Talpiot community focused on climate tech, and you give credit to their alumni network. And there's one particular person named Ram Amar who has a very interesting company called Rewind, but he's kind of catalyzed a lot of this interest and activity. And the answer is, it's not because it's cool. It's because these people want to make a difference. They made a difference in a very important area that's very close to their heart, which is security. And a lot of them served 10 years at least, and now they want to make a difference. And they're walking into our office and saying, we're doing something that we think is going to make a difference for our children and our grandchildren. Not to mention the fact that we think, as does Larry Fink from BlackRock, that's one of the biggest economic opportunities in the next 20, 30 years. So I have this ability to work on something that I'm passionate on and work on something that I think is going to be extraordinarily economically successful. What a wonderful opportunity. It's hard, and we can come back and talk about all of the challenges of what makes this so much harder than other areas which are also very meaningful, like cyber or digital health or insurtech or what have you, right? But there is definitely a trend, particularly in the past 2 to 3 years, of people coming into climate tech. I'll say one other thing, which is I honestly think people see it. They just see the climate change. I remember 2 summers ago, my wife and I were planning a trip to not this summer, but the past one. We were going to go to Europe for the summer, and we couldn't go. We had tickets and reservations for northern Greece, and northern Greece was on fire. And basically, the guy called us and said, he said, you can't come. I have no air conditioning. And so then we looked all around Europe. Where else could we go? Well, you couldn't go to at the time, Western Europe, because that was all flooded, right? So it's sort of like, this is flooded. This is on fire. It's here. We need to act. And these are very, very motivated people who are used to tackling significant challenges. So that's exciting. That is very exciting to see that kind of talent and those kinds of networks get involved in this space.
One of those on the side of one of your points, I've got this little theory. Okay. That we've always had in Israel a lot of, as I say, firepower coming out of army graduates, especially technology ones, from all the experiences that they've had in the army and the technology experience in the army, and coming to program on the outside of the army. It's interesting about sustainability, because when we talk sustainability, somehow the armies of the world seem to be the last ones who are ever going to arrive there. And the challenges of how to actually make a sustainable army, that is way beyond my pay grade at the moment. But it's almost thinking a reactionary kind of response from all these youngsters who are technologically very smart, and they come out of a place which is really backward in terms of futuristic sustainability thinking. And then they maybe kind of rebound and say, hey, we got to change that. So I'm wondering when that's going to kick in.
Well, look, it's interesting that you mentioned it. I mean, the IDF has had a person responsible for green and sustainability for many years. I haven't met the current one. I've met people in the past. I've also remember they used to launch awards and prizes for some of the greenest invention within the Army. I do remember one year where it was this particular one. It was something that kind of was like sprinkling a little bit of water ahead of the tanks, and therefore causing a hell of a lot less dust kick up, which is a very big environmentally negative, not a carbon problem, right? Just an environmentally negative for air quality and the like, the pudra and all that, right? So I absolutely believe that the military is a place to start as early adopters for some of these things. And I can tell you, by the way, that in the wave of 2005 to 2010 biofuels, the U.S. Navy was the early adopter customer for a lot of the biodiesel that was being worked on at the time. One company in America that went public called Solazyme, that was their contract, and the reason is, they wanted this. They saw the triple benefit for them, right? In other words, thinking about geopolitically and geostrategically, the U.S.'s ability to try to generate additional energy independence and all the like. And of course, what happened was fracking came along, and that helped. It was very harmful environmentally, but it certainly helped with energy independence for a little while. I think that the militaries are. I'll just give you another example, right? If you think about a forward military base, again, I'll use the American example. Like, America's pulled back now from Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, think about what the cost of fuel is at the edge over there. It's not $2 a gallon or $4 a gallon. It's $100 a gallon when you put together the shipping, the security to bring it to that forward base, and et cetera. So if there were alternative sources of fuel, of course it makes sense. By the way, solar power for sure. U.S. commando forces and the like have always used that because remote power and the like. So I do believe that that is a place that they should be focused on. But I will say one thing, and this is critical to say, and maybe which is technology is amazing. And we're going to talk more about it here. And we'll talk maybe about a couple of examples. But to solve the global warming problem that we have, if we do not do it with smart policy, we're going to get nowhere. And I'll give you just a parallel with that. Like in the water crisis that we have had in Israel in the past, we're never going to be out of it entirely, but we solved it for a very long period of time. But with technology, of course, with desalination, but it wasn't such advanced tech. It was existing technology. Yes, we used some innovative things, and every plant that we built, the cost, per cubic meter of water that we were desalinating was a little bit cheaper. But the bottom line is the government just said, this is something that we have to do. We're pushing for it. We're going to get the permitting up and down the coastline. We're going to do the tenders, and we're going to make this happen. And we need that kind of political and policy resolve globally to solve this problem as well. Of course, that's extraordinarily hard. We just had the COPE event, and we'll keep on having those. We get better every year, but that's still an area of challenge.
Okay, fantastic. Just while I wait you on that point of that, I want to close my window because there are amazing birds outside, but I assume they may be interfering with the
okay,
audio.
no, yeah, no problem. I haven't heard them, but no problem. Yeah,
I'm sure Rob will be able to take care of this one. As much as I'm appreciating the birds, they may be contributing a bit too much to the tweeting of the session.
sounds good.
You mentioned one other thing, which was quite it's an obvious point, but I want to focus on it a second. And that is when you spoke about the investment community, and especially you as an investor in kind of a pre-seed and very early stage, you really have to be ahead of the curve. Okay, at least you aim to be ahead of the curve. And that's it's fascinating. How do you get ahead of such a curve? What is your tactic for kind of seeing in the future?
It's a great question because I've said this many times. There are pre-seed and seed investors who are originally themselves technologists, okay, or scientists, or, who sort of know, have a bit of a roadmap about where the science is going. Of course, if you spend a lot of time in this as a non-scientist or non-engineer, you get to learn that a little bit. But I am focused on it's my entrepreneurs and the founders who see the future by me, and it's my job to find them, right? So I get to see the future because it's walking into my office every day. My job is to make sure that they're walking into my office first early enough so that I get access to the deal, so that I have the opportunity to evaluate it. Of course, I maintain a huge network of advisors to then ultimately help analyze that, whether some of them are scientists and academics, some of them are engineers, some of them are past entrepreneurs, some of them are current entrepreneurs. I just got off of a call this morning where I was talking to the founder of Carbon Blue, which is one of our carbon removal technology companies. And I told him about a different carbon removal technology company that I saw yesterday. And he's somebody that can help me take a look at that. So they're the ones that are really seeing and by the way, where the future is. And of course, the big challenge as an investor is not to invest too far ahead of the future, because if it's either the technology is not as feasible as you thought, or just the rest of the world doesn't think it's going to be feasible, you won't be able to fund it to continue to make it feasible. There's that metaphor of Gretzky, the great hockey player, who says, I skated to where the puck was going, right? That's what we have to do as early stage investors. It is hard. I don't think I'm not Wayne Gretzky, certainly not in hockey, and I'm not even that as an investor, but I think what we do a very good job at is, because we're really strong and good partners for entrepreneurs at an early stage, as mentors, as supporters, as people who have just been doing this and seen this, the ups, the downs, the challenges, the very personal challenges, by the way, of failing and then turning around and succeeding and picking up. I think that we have a very good reputation to get those people to want to partner with us. And then when they come into our office and they talk about how this is where, the world of green hydrogen is going, or this is where the world of next generation alternative proteins, milk from fermenters as opposed to from cows. Okay, so I've heard about that a little bit in the past, but I'm not the one that's staying on top of the latest articles in Nature or in Science or whatever. I then have to then bring somebody who can check out and say, and it's my job to sort of analyze that consulting assessment of the potential. I'll say one thing just about that as well, because I think this could be helpful for people. That whenever I take an external consultant, I always tell them, I want you to tell me why this thing is horrible, right? And I want you to really just point out all the, not horrible, but I want you to point out all the warts and all of the issues. But yet you can see sometimes when they get that glimmer in their eye of oh, wow, this one really appeals to me. And it's not that off. It's not that it's not that infrequent. It is frequent, or it happens a lot, that the consultant ends up does the job for us and then becomes a consultant to the company afterwards because they're so excited about the project. And that's when maybe you have something that's of particular interest. But you also have to know who you're hiring as a consultant, right? Because there are some people that are always going to be extraordinarily skeptical, and there are some people that are always going to be enamored by new technology, and you have to have a sense of who you're talking to. So those are the people that really see the future and live in the future. My job is to see them and have a good sense of when to make the actual bet on them and how to analyze it.
Okay, I mean, it's really interesting because I can identify it from my point of view. I'm, as you know, in the field of intellectual property, and I do IP management consulting, and I actually have not got a strong technical background. And so I'm kind of an exceptional player in the field because I kind of come to it with a business look and a kind of a business perspective, so to speak. So I'm not the one who's once again inventing all the technology, so to speak, but I'm kind of just trying to translate that perspective from these real technological people and put it into some sort of market and real day sense. So I do think I can understand where you're coming from in that, and it gives me some grace and some good feeling that good we're kindred spirits maybe on that dimension.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now moving to one of the other questions, right? We spoke actually at the beginning of our call before we even started recording about a lot of pessimism in the marketplace at the moment. Okay, obviously we're looking at global recession, or at least talk of global recession, and we're talking about ups and downs and insecurities, and we don't know what's really cutting out there. And we're also seeing a huge green energy, backlash. We're talking about the world had such great hopes for the last 2 years, and suddenly this Russian invasion of Ukraine comes along. And Europeans are starting to refire their coal plants. So with all of that in place, how do you understand today's green tech market and investment environment? How has this changed things for you, or what does this tell you?
So a couple of parts to that question. So let's start with the energy, the specific energy one with a specific focus in Europe and energy independence versus green energy and the like. Tom Friedman from the New York Times wrote a good piece about this about 6 weeks or so ago, where he sort of said, look, there are5, I don't remember what all 5 were. There are 5 things that we all would want. We want our energy independence, and we want our energy to be green, and we don't want to be working with oligarchical or corrupt regimes, and we want every energy partner that we have to be a human rights supporter and all that. We can't have it all. It's not, the world isn't set up that way, and so we have to make some compromises. We can't be strident, in all of these things. And then there's the nuclear question, right? Which I've always been one to believe that nuclear should be a part of the answer, and I think that it does have, from a carbon perspective, a much better profile and situation. And I think that it's a tragedy to some extent. Certainly in the United States, my uncle is a nuclear physicist, and his first day on the job after his PhD was I think it was probably around 1977 or 78 when 3 Mile Island incident happened in the United States. And as a result, he spent a career of 25, 30 years at the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, not building another nuclear power plant when he could have been there building 30. And instead he spent it, sort of just regulating and pushing paper around. And I don't mean to, of course, minimize the safety issues around this, not at all, but I do think that they're manageable. And I think that we have that technology. And so I'm supportive of Europe's, sort of additional focus on that. But I think that, and let's also understand that cheap energy is what's driven the possibility of bringing billions of people out of poverty and into, a better life. So, of course, politicians are always going to be looking to try to keep energy cheap, and if that means firing up coal power plants so that even if there is some long-term economic damage, we have that tension. It's like if we don't find a way to solve for some of the energy gaps, there's going to be human suffering as well. So we can't always be strident about, no, it has to be this, or, I think that we did make some mistakes about not planning for this transition over a longer period of time. But I also think that carbon and greenhouse gases are the ultimate externality. And I learned economics from a conservative professor. Martin Feldstein was my professor. He was Ronald Reagan's economic advisor. This was no, bleeding heart liberal economist. And he explained to me, and I can almost even remember the various graphs that you put up in economics and this, when there's an externality, which means a tragedy of the commons, and nobody is paying for the damage, it needs to be priced into the product. And so I absolutely believe in a carbon tax, and nobody even talks about it. But that's what we need. And it's not going to happen because the political willpower isn't there to make it happen. But little by little, we're finding other ways to chip at that problem with carbon markets and offsets, and corporations are trying to bring it in. It should be globally mandated. It should be a big part of it. It's not going to happen. It's a problem that it's not happening. And I'll say something else also, again, about how policy and technology sort of interface. I mean, China, and this hurt my first fund, okay? It's well-known story how China took the PV photovoltaic manufacturing market away from everybody else, okay? There were great European companies, one called Q-Cells, and there were some really interesting US companies. The thin film one is escaping me right now, First Solar, right, in the US. These were companies that were doing sort of next generation, more effective and efficient solar cells. The Chinese looked at all of this. They didn't have that technology, but what they had was free capital, effectively, to build so many plants to drive the cost down significantly so that everybody that was installing photovoltaic panels, which initially wasn't terribly economically effective, started installing Chinese ones because they were cheap. And so what they did by doing that was something that was completely illegal from an international trade perspective, okay, and wrong. But on the other hand, it served humanity. It certainly served them. It served humanity because it drove adoption of PV up significantly. So it's a problem because state actors, especially those that really want to capture something, can act in unfair ways. And I think it's like, so if certain countries were to impose carbon taxes, other countries would not, and they would become energy exporters to those that, so it's a challenge of how do you get the regulatory and the green and the need for cheap energy for human progress. But on the other hand, the externality that the fossil fuel cheap energies are causing, how do you get that all together? It's the challenge of our time. I'm very I believe, frankly, that if the Western countries led with carbon taxes, we would innovate, and we would then have innovative technologies to then sell to the rest of the world as they started to get on board. I think that it's not a bad idea, but a lot of people would never go in that direction. I'm frustrated, frankly, with Israel. We go to COPE, and I'm a fan of us walking into these events. Naftali Bennett, our last prime minister, went to Glasgow and said, Israeli technology, I'm going to come. And he did a great thing. He said, I'm going to get the best Israeli entrepreneurs to focus on these areas, especially the serial ones. And he himself, by the way, right, was a serial entrepreneur before he became a politician. And I think that was inspiring. And I think that but at the same time, I'm like, that's great, but now you're a politician. Why don't you come back home and push for some serious environmental regulations over here, which will constrain us, and it will be hard for us. I get that, but we will innovate around the hard, and we will innovate around the constraints. We'll do something better for our own country in terms of our own environmental consciousness, and then we'll export those technologies as well. And so politicians, need the willpower to do that. In certain areas of the world, their constituents demand it. And that's why Germany and the Nordics are leaders in all of this, because their constituents demand it. They demand green from their politicians. I hope that trend continues everywhere. So anyway, that's a bit of a one other point. One other, you touched on the recession and all of that. I will say this: if in the fundraising environment, if you're an entrepreneur now and you're thinking about starting a company, if you were thinking about starting an enterprise SaaS company right now, you're going to be much more depressed than if you're thinking about starting a climate tech or green tech or ag tech or food tech company right now. The money flow into the areas of climate, food, agriculture it never peaked the way that it did in climate, but it has not dropped off as much as well. New funds are being raised. New funds are coming across in Israel. There's a new food tech fund that just started investing or just announced in Israel, run by, interestingly enough, Omri Sharon, that's Ariel Sharon's son, and Nadav Peres, Chemi Peres's son, or Shimon Peres's grandson. So it's a nice kind of two political families coming together, and they're funding food tech in Israel. It's the main areas that are, I think, really kind of peaked in the bubble and came back down to earth are the enterprise SaaS stuff, and they'll be fine. Also, it's just that they have to realize that the past 2 to 3 years was an anomaly there in terms of multiples and in terms of valuations and in terms of buying, and that's going to return back down to earth. The companies in agricultural, food, whatever, they never had those bubbly peaks. Well, some maybe did. You could argue in the alternative protein space, but there are generally speaking, there are major market trends that are on the consumer side as well that are driving those technologies forward. So
listen, I'll take that optimism, because at least in this sector, from an investment standpoint, there is money around. There's investment that wants to pour into these things. Interestingly enough, relating to one of the points you made, the policy argument that lots of countries, the constituents are pushing them to make, in the Scandinavian countries, for example, they've pushed it ahead of the curve. But the fact is that there's a big issue we have in gaps between certain markets, right? Because there isn't this universal adoption of different standards. So even though, for example, the price of carbon, that countries are charging, is vastly different. From South Africa, it's around $10 a ton or something, compared to Sweden, which is more than 10 times that. And that caused the kind of triage effect where people will start exporting their carbon problems and their costs somewhere else. So what we're going to do is kick the can down the road again. And so we need to find some kind of recipe to doing it. By the way, I've been trying to make some effort in that direction. I don't know if you saw, I recently published a whole paper about the 10 commitments, about the 10 green commitments inspired by the 10 commandments. And it's a whole kind of platform I'm trying to put together to try and push a kind of universalizing message where we got to find a consensus on certain grounds around sustainability being kind of the original commandments that we have preceding the Torah, okay, which were for Adam and Eve to kind of look after the garden while they do their economic thing of making humanity kind of become scientific and progressive. Anyway, it's a whole challenge. It's a whole shtick that I've got, but we do need some buy-in, and we need to kind of find some consensus, even though there's a big question of eco-justice, right? How can the big rich Western countries who've been polluting the world for 100 years suddenly come and demand the same standard as poor developing countries who are in a different plane? On the other hand, we can't exclude that, and we can't ignore that. So we need to find the consensus point where we can kind of agree. So there's a lot to talk about, and I could relate to lots of your points that you made. But in the interest of trying to flow through this and not take too long from your time or that of the listeners afterwards, I want to move to one or two other questions. First of all, how do you see Israeli green tech companies kind of competing on a global scale when you compare them with other countries and technologies being developed, whether from Scandinavia or elsewhere?
Look, so I think some Israeli companies, the biggest example of the most successful one, obviously, is SolarEdge. And some Israeli companies have really managed to position themselves, Nitafim, obviously, over many, many years is another great example. And others position themselves as global leaders with their headquarters over here with management teams. It's nice that these are global markets that we're talking about, right? And so when they're global markets, you can be based in Israel and you can be traveling east or west. Okay. One of our companies, for example, Groundwork BioAg, which is off to a very, very great start and just raised a nice amount of money and doing something extraordinarily sustainable, has sales in all of the big agricultural markets. So that's not just the United States. That's the United States, Brazil, India, China, Ukraine, actually. Okay. Even with all that's going on right now, that's obviously a massive agricultural market. So I think that you can create global leaders out of Israel. It will take time. It's taking time. Certainly in the alternative protein space, we have a global leading reputation with companies like Imagine Dairy and Olive Farms, which is even ahead of Imagine Dairy, and Future Meat and others. And I think the way that Israelis are going to succeed in these markets, of course, is through partnering. So, for example, if you ask me who do I think are going to be the leaders in carbon removal technologies and projects down the road, I think it's the oil and gas companies. I think the same companies that took the hydrocarbons out of the earth are going to put the carbons back in it. And I think that it's because we have such a strong reputation for out of the box innovation and daring, and there's not a single oil major that doesn't come over to Israel with their venturing team or their innovation team and look for things. And that's so different than it was 15 years ago. I mean, I can tell you, I had one of the majors as an investor in our second fund. And at the time that it happened, they were very nervous because they were, large oil and gas companies sometimes can get taxed in different states because they and then the state will try to overreach and tax them even on things that are activities are not in the states. And that company wanted a strong legal opinion that just by investing as a limited partner in our fund, which wasn't even an Israeli entity, that they weren't exposing us. And now here we are, and that same group has made direct investments in Israel. Okay, like they've invested directly, not just through a fund, and in Store Dots, okay, in a battery technology company, and you name it, Shell, Chevron, BP, Total, they've all been here. They're all looking for interesting things, particularly around carbon removal and electrochemistry and the like. So the way I think that the Israeli companies, the emerging Israeli companies, are going to win in these markets is with partnerships, strong partnerships. And people are here to partner. They are all looking, whether it's on the, that's for like carbon removal and upstream, but it's also for obviously in the vehicle space, right? I mean, it's not just that we have partnerships between a lot of the next generation mobility companies. We also have General Motors research center here, which now has, what is it, like 80, 90 PhDs, 100 maybe even, sitting in Herzliya. And General Motors has made it very clear that their entire future is electric. So I think that we're positioned well. We're positioned well with partnerships, with multinationals, to create a few, hopefully another, 5 or so SolarEdge-like outcomes over the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay,
maybe
great.
10.
That's
maybe
amazing.
10.
And I really welcome that information that you provided about the big energy companies who are out here scouting. Okay. I too share that belief with you that, to just criticize and mock and smash all the fossil fuel companies, that all the damage they've done in the past, it doesn't mean it's wrong to criticize what they've done in the past. But they are going to be the ones who are going to be responsible for a lot of the problem solving going forward. It's in both directions. On the one hand, the faster that they move forward, the less they continue to pollute. On the other hand, they've got resources. Okay. I was actually just thinking when you said that, they've actually got the physical resources, right? They talk about, for example, burying carbon in mines. Well, who owns all these mines?
No, exactly.
And who's got all these fields that they've
drilled? Or burying carbon in the same oil and gas fields where they took the oil and gas out of, which they do. Because of it, they already inject CO2 for processes called enhanced oil recovery, and green people will criticize all of that. And I understand that there's problems with enhanced oil recovery, but I'm talking about using some of those facilities, like you said, for actual carbon storage of CO2 gas and capping them, and these are areas that have to develop, and they have the engineering talent and scale to push these things forward.
Okay, great. So that's I share that vision entirely, and it's a really interesting point. And I think from our tradition, we've got this idea of tshuva, of repentance, so to speak, right? And that means that one of the famous commenters, the Rambam, he came along and he said, how do you know if someone's really done this? Because if they would be in the same situation again, they wouldn't do it again. Okay, it's an indication that they've really come around. Okay, and in this case here, once again, it's almost could be quite an ironic point that those same companies who took out all the carbon, released it into the world, did all this damage, and built all these big things, could be the ones to plug it back in and to help us kind of like solve that problem, because they're in that position to do it. Okay, so I hope they are coming along and coming over and wanting to really, really sincerely get involved in how to fix this mess that they've caused, because they're going to be one of the big solvers as well. Okay, so it's really interesting that point. Um, once again, I'm actually going to skip quite a few things I wanted to ask you because there's been such fascinating stuff to discuss.
We could
But
do it
what is
again.
what is one of the challenges? How could we challenge kind of technology listeners of this podcast in Israel, entrepreneurs of the future? What challenge would you throw out to them in order to try and boost the spirit of entrepreneurship in this country,
I
in
mean, you're
Israel?
saying like a specific technology challenge that I think would be good for new entrepreneurs to focus on. Is that
Well,
what you're
let me go.
asking?
I was gonna ask that before, and I've kind of heard the word carbon sequestration
Yeah,
kind of for a long time. That's something which I understand is close to your heart. But
yeah.
beyond the actual technology sector, what challenge would you set out to a future entrepreneur in the space? Something that a bone you could throw them and say, "Hey, catch this," in terms of trying to really get to that global level of leadership.
Yeah, I think that the Israeli entrepreneur often starts with a strong technology focus and less the biz. I think the challenge is just to make sure that you know how to partner, and when you know how to partner, that means both what you never do up front. That's like an area where I think Focus IP probably can help a lot as well in terms of like don't poison your IP. You'll never bring returns to your investors if somehow you have compromised your own core the core intellectual property, the core invention that you have in your technology. If somehow you have allowed somebody to out invent it because you haven't protected it properly, or if you've allowed somebody to get access to it because you've done some joint IP work with them and they get some ownership over it, you're in trouble. And these are conversations that I literally had one of these this morning, because at the same time, you need to partner to succeed. So you have to partner the right way. You have to know what your partner is looking for, what they'll be able to commercialize and benefit from, how the two of you will benefit together if you do some joint development. There's no, especially in these areas, there is no product that sells like independently. A lot of these products are part of larger projects. I mean, even if you go back to SolarEdge, right? I mean, they developed effectively like a micro inverter, and so they had to be partnering with the panel manufacturers, and they ultimately developed their own inverter. We backed, by the way, a competitor of theirs, which was actually partnering with inverter companies as well, right? And that competitor did okay, unfortunately, not quite as well as SolarEdge, but so I think that you have to recognize that if you're working in this area of whether it's food tech or whether it's agri-tech or whether it's energy related, that all of them have significant environmental benefits to the next generation of technologies. You will be partnering with behemoths very early on. If you're in food tech, you'll be partnering with the ingredient companies or with the consumer packaging good companies, or sometimes with engineering companies, because you'll have developed a new process and you need an engineering firm to be the ones to manufacture the equipment to work for your process. The same thing, I think, in anything that's electrochemical related or chemical related, and so I think that's, as a founder, don't just only think about your own invention. Think about what are the best partnering strategies generically. Focus on that, learn that, study that. In Israel, for example, one of the best economic commercial successes that ever came out of the country is Copaxone, right? The MS drug that Teva developed. I happen to have been a young lawyer in the United States working for the law firm that represented Teva. So I know all of the different partnering agreements that Teva did to bring that product, or I knew back in from 96 to 99, to bring that product to the world. And my God, there were a lot of them, right? Hearst, Marion, Roussel, these are names that are they've all merged into different companies at this point in time. But Teva brought the product to market in the United States with one partner, and in Russia with a different partner, in Europe with a third partner. And of course, the entire Copaxone itself was a joint development between the Weizmann Institute and Teva. So if you just think, and at the end of the day, you ended up with a product which has, made the lives of, probably millions of MS patients around the world better, and which generated billions of high margin revenue until it became generic, and even now is still generating lower margin, but strong revenue for Teva. But that never, none of it would have happened without Teva saying to themselves, look, we didn't even know how to invent this molecule. We partnered with somebody who did that. That's the Whiteman Institute. We knew how to take that molecule and get it through the regulatory approval. But now we need somebody who knows how to market to doctors in the field, and we didn't know how to do that. And so they partnered with that. So I think that studying successful partnership practices for young entrepreneurs in this climate tech green area is a challenge that I would suggest they take upon themselves. It's a great question, by the way. I never really thought about it, but I feel like I came up with a good answer. So actually, I'm going to take this back and tell some of my own entrepreneurs some of this advice as well.
I welcome you to take that with you. I invite you. Just on that point, I want to emphasize as well, I've been in a lot of discussions as well about IP and sustainability. And to some degree, often I do get criticisms. I'm not just a total blindfolded IP practitioner of sorts, because there's always a concern, right? That IP means almost that you're sewing up your technology and you're limiting it. But I want to emphasize the absolute aim, at least from my point of view, right, is encouraging technology to be spread and to be leveraged. So the aim of the IP isn't that I'm inventing something and keeping it to myself for that sake. That's not the point of it. The point is that firstly, it's being published to the world. So if I, for example, have got a patent and I patented it in America and Europe and China, and I don't patent it everywhere in the world, it's public information. And in all those other countries, it can be taken and used, okay? So that's amazing blessing you're giving to societies around the world. But the second thing, as you said, for deal flow, for business flow, it's a currency that I can trade in afterwards. So I've put my technology out, even if I've patented my core technology, whatever it may be. The aim is to trade. The aim is to make deals. And as you said, form partnerships. And that's one of the ways we can help do that. But I do want to ask you, just in closing, what is if I had to give you if you're suddenly walking in a cave in the Yehuda desert and you see a bottle with a genie in it, and the genie comes out and says, Jack, how could you change the world? What wish have you got to make the world more sustainable and green and beautiful? What would you wish for?
If I had a genie, what wish would I make for in order to develop progress on the green and climate related problems? And I answered it that I think that if I had a wish and I could change the hearts and minds of people to love each other as they love themselves and to really view us all with one common humanity and one common destiny, I think we would then have the global political willpower to address the challenges that we have. Because I think that the technologies are in hand. I really believe that. And we will continue to innovate and bring them. But they have to be motivated. I believe that business is the right approach because I believe in a capitalism drives innovation and people want to profit from the innovation and they'll work harder if they think that they're going to make the lives of their immediate families better. But I also think that in this space, there are a lot of multinational policy opportunities and challenges. And if somehow if we were to view that Pakistani, a farmer who suffered from massive climate change with these horrible floods that happened as somebody that was as close to us, as our own family. And it's very hard to do, and it's almost unnatural to do, but it's something that if we were to take that approach on a multinational policy level, then we would find ways to bring carbon tax to the world. And if we were to do that, then we would be accelerating the pace of development of these technologies in the right way, because we'd be bringing the externality into the product on the hydrocarbons. And that's fair. And that's right. Like my Reagan-trained economist taught me when I was a young college student. And so I think what we need to do is to be a little less narrow and selfish about, say, our own family, tribe, nation. We have to view this as a collective human problem. And I think if we did that together, but on the flip side of it, of course, it also means that we won't have sort of bad state actors who will then take advantage of it. Like I told the story of the Chinese taking advantage of the photovoltaic market, and they competed unfairly, and that's wrong too. So if I had the genie and all of us really viewed each other's success as equal, I think that we would have much better political outcomes to incentivize and bring about the progress that I think technologically is within reach.
Okay, well, Jack, that's amazing because I do also share that optimism that technology is incredible and we're making huge strides forward. And I think a lot of our problems could be solved by technologically solved at least, but it needs the political will to push those changes through and to equalize them all over. But I also share a certain optimism, and I take your wish from the genie that you got a more of a greater structure than just a green kind of focus. Because yes, to change the hearts and minds of people, if we can work together, we can kind of find a consensus around themes that we can all work together to build a world that's better for all of our grandchildren, not just ours living in our city, which we share the same city, but for all of us. So on that note of optimism and of marriage of technology and of values, which is what I've been talking about a lot lately, I'm going to just like really thank you for sharing, for taking the time to give your perspective, to share your vision, to share some dreams, to share some optimism. And I really appreciate it. Look forward to the next conversation. Look forward to being in touch again after this call. And I want to wish you and all the listeners all the best, continued success in this mission that we're on. And I hope we can make the world a better place every day. Thanks.
Thank
Okay.
you, Yaron. I really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to continuing it.